views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to editors and journalists and writers and sometimes filmmakers, videographers, really anybody who puts something out in the borough of the Bronx. And for our second segment, we're going to be talking with a gentleman who has put out some unbelievable reports about their accomplishments in Bronx health and Bronx nutrition and working with young people. But before that, we're going to get started and bring back a longtime friend of ours, Samar Khurshid from Gotham Gazette. Nice to have you with us once again, Samar. How are you?
Thanks, Gary. I'm doing well. You're all
Great.
too.
I didn't realize that you mentioned before the show that it had been all the way to before the pandemic that we had been together. That's way too long. So we're going to have you back. Anyway, I was particularly interested, as I mentioned to you, in this piece you wrote. It's actually maybe even about a month ago about the Bronx becoming a focal point in the mayoral race. You may or may not know, we did a forum here on BronxNet with 8 of the mayoral candidates. Went very, very well. Many seem to really understand and know what the borough of the Bronx is. Talk to me about why you singled out our home borough in the mayor's race.
Well, it's funny that people like to say that Staten Island's the forgotten borough, but it seems that Bronxites quite feel the same thing. That because it is the 4th largest borough, it also comes in 4th in. So it's 4th in population, 4th in number of registered Democrats, number of total registered voters. Also, it's also 4th in turnout. So what happens is because it's 4th in turnout, Democratic candidates for mayor especially tend not to, focus on it because they think that's not where they're going to get the votes to win a primary. Especially in a primary, focus on the vote-rich areas, places like Central Brooklyn, the Upper East Side, Upper West Side, places where they think, because they just need a couple of 100,000 votes to win. They don't need all 8 million,
That's right.
So what happens is the Bronx tends to get ignored. Every 4 years, candidates might come by, make some broad promises, and then, return the next time they're up for re-election or,
Right. Right. So what was the change that pushed it forward for this year that all of a sudden they were like, oh yeah, we love the Bronx?
Well, this year, every candidate has been proposing and should be proposing a plan for rebuilding the city, for the city's recovery. And if you're going to talk about the city's recovery, you can't ignore what is one of the hardest hit boroughs. Like the Bronx has had some of the worst public health outcomes, some of the highest rates of COVID infections, and these are long-standing problems that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So if candidates are going to be talking about recovery for the city, they can't just, a plan for Manhattan doesn't work for the Bronx. The plan for Staten Island doesn't work for the Bronx. So they need to have borough-specific plans is what people are looking at them for. Voters in the Bronx especially want to hear from them how they're gonna show up, and not just before election day, but after.
I think anybody who's serious about trying to understand what has gone on over the past year has got to obviously take a look at the Bronx. I will tell you, as somebody who's been sitting in this seat for a while, this is an ongoing issue for the people of the Bronx. And I have told this story many times. Somewhere in the late 90s, Freddie Ferrer ran a press conference under the L at Yankee Stadium, had a big sign that said, "Don't dump on the Bronx." Since that time, and not to say it never happened before, but people of the Bronx have said, you know what, we're not getting it from anywhere else. We're going to do it ourselves. And so, I mean, we have hundreds of not-for-profit organizations. And so your analysis, I believe, is pretty accurate that they have ignored us. To his credit, Chairman Jamal Bailey of the Bronx Democratic County Committee has said, wait a minute, if you want Bronx votes, we gotta see who you are. And frankly, they came to us and said, why don't you run a debate? And they talked about the Bronx. Long way of saying, my sense is when I interviewed and did that program, that the candidates, I don't want to miss anybody, Eric Adams, Diane Morales, Maya Wiley, Scott Stringer, Sean Donovan and Catherine Garcia were all on the program we did. They seemed to really have a real sense of what the Bronx was.
Ruben Diaz Jr. was at one point considered one a possible top contender for the mayor's race. Now, if he was running, he would have the Bronx locked up. He's extremely popular, extremely affable. People recognize him on the street. They wave at him, shout from cars to him. And I've seen that in person. Now, with him, when he decided he's not going to run, when he decided he's going to retire after his term ends, that leaves the Bronx entirely open to any other candidate. There's no other major candidate in this race who's from the Bronx. There's no Bronx candidate per se, So that basically means it's an open field. It's like, anyone, it's up for grabs.
It's almost like because he decided not to run, there was a void in the borough of the Bronx. But, I guess I can appreciate that you said we have the, fourth largest population, but there's still a 1.4 million people here. And if people were to get behind one candidate, that would pretty well, swing the thing. Let's talk a little bit while we have a little time about budgets. I don't think people understand it. And right now, there's no money. Of course, we'll see if the stimulus package helps to provide some relief. So let's talk about the De Blasio's preliminary budget, which was about $92.3 billion, and then the city council's reaction to it.
So the mayor presented a worst case scenario budget. The $92.3 billion that he presented, that doesn't account for any federal aid. They budgeted as if they weren't receiving any federal aid. So it's not as bad as it was.
And let me just interject, because we think there could be money in the stimulus package that will help.
There's $6 billion specifically for New York City in the stimulus package. So that solves a lot of the city's problems. But what it doesn't do, this is a one-time injection of funds. So what it doesn't do is solve the structural problems in the city budget, because once this money is gone, the same issue is going to show up. So the same problems that they have now will, reappear after federal funding disappears. So the problem is, he's using a $1.15 billion from the reserves. He said he's going to find $1 billion in labor savings, but he hasn't said how. And he's, spending is still going up. There's a lot of, as the comptroller has pointed out, there's a lot of areas where the city spends but doesn't get many results for it. So these are structural issues that they'll have to sort out by creating more savings, finding more efficiency, if they want to make sure that these budget gaps just don't persist in the future. Because one of the biggest issues now is that property taxes, which is a large part of city revenue, it's usually considered very stable. Property taxes are going to fall by about $2.5 billion because
I'm sure.
Because office buildings and hotels, their values have just plummeted because they've been empty since the pandemic hit. So that's going to be the biggest issue for the city to confront next year.
One of the, and you did, I do want to mention, people can look it up very easily on Gotham Gazette. You wrote a piece on how the mayoral candidates said that they were going to, try and address this. But there's no question that with all those empty office buildings in Manhattan, something's got to give, and I'm not the guy. I'm not the financial guy to figure out how to do it. The other thing that is striking to me, and I frankly haven't ridden the subway since the pandemic, but people I know who have said conditions with homeless people and people with mental issues are roaming through the subway, and it's a very serious situation. That is also a financial thing, because in order to solve it, you have somehow got to deal with social service support infrastructure, certainly job development, and also, of course, housing, which is really, that's what makes a homeless person homeless. Any thoughts on that? Does that fall to the next mayor? Is it a financial problem? How do you see that being addressed?
It absolutely falls to the next mayor. It's both a financial problem. It's also a values problem, because between Governor Cuomo and Mayor De Blasio, their first instinct has always been to throw cops at the issue, and as we're seeing in this race for mayor, most of the candidates are proposing solutions that increase mental health services support, social supports, investing in affordable housing, supportive housing. These are the types of things that will, help keep people off the streets, help keep people in stable housing, instead of, criminalizing them or, jailing homeless people for the crime of being homeless.
Homeless, yeah.
Uh,
I have to tell you, I smiled when you said that, because no candidate for council or citywide office is going to sit there and say, no, I'm not going to put in money for mental health social service support. But of course, somehow we get to the bottom line and that ends up being what's cut. I have a feeling the sensibility right now in the nation and in the city is, you know what, especially with everything going on, we really do have to spend this time on it.
Right.
That's my
Right.
thought.
And let's not forget the stimulus package includes nearly $100 billion in money that's going to come either directly or indirectly to New Yorkers, to New York State. That includes, there's money for transit, there's money for mass transit, so the MTA is going to get some. There's money, there's unemployment insurance, there's direct, the stimulus checks, of course, $1,400 each. The $12.5 billion that the state will get in direct financial relief. The city will get $6 billion. City and in towns, municipalities, everyone will get some. So a lot of that money is also going to go towards investing in all these programs that the city and state desperately need to do right now.
Samar, we're just about out of time. What do you got coming up? Anything you want to tip us off to?
Well, I have a story on the budget coming up today.
There you go. Well, we're recording this Monday, so by Thursday when it airs, people will be able to read that story.
Yeah, I have a story on the budget, and then continuing our coverage of the mayoral candidates. We've been doing a series on strengths and weaknesses for each candidate. So
but we do got to run. Make sure you check out, if you haven't already, the Bronx mayoral forum that we did, which provided some interest in the borough of the Bronx, which is the first topic we talked about. Anyway, don't be a stranger. We want to have you back. You're just one of the real important journalists in New York City. Samar Khurshid from Gotham Gazette, thank you so much. We're going to take a short break. We're going to put on a different kind of hat and do something a lot different, but it's going to be inspiring. I can promise you that. So don't go away. We'll be back with the Bronx Buzz right after this.